I almost said welcome as if I was like, bringing you guys to the brewery, but I should say, thank you for welcoming me. I'm Garrett Oliver. I'm the brewmaster of Brooklyn Brewery. Um, Thank you. I know that I'm speaking here as an American male, which is, in of itself a rarefied species. But I think brewmaster has to be. Well, it's probably the third coolest title that you can have, in American male life, if you like. I mean, you kind of like there's quarterback, and then there's astronaut, but right behind astronaut is brewmaster. They always say that you know that you have some kind of success if you enjoy saying what you do when you go to parties. So I get to go to parties, and I'm like brewmaster. It's like a version of the Force. It's kind of good. I do remember one time I went to a party though, and the guy said, "Hey, what do you do?" I'm like, "Brewmaster," and I'm like, "What do you do?" He's like, "Fighter pilot," and I was like, "Oh." Like your kung fu is very powerful. That was the only time I ever got like a brushback pitch. So I do love it, and we get to do an awful lot of cool stuff. I'm grateful that I've been doing this for 27 years, and I still get to do it every day. Yesterday, I was actually out on a boat, the Seaport Museum, and you guys should know this. The Seaport Museum runs a 130-year-old schooner called the Pioneer. And the Pioneer is a full rigged sailing vessel, and we took it out on the harbor. And the day started hot, but it got really, really nice. Beautiful sunset. We went out around, Statue of Liberty and whatever else, and you kind of come to remember, that this is really a water city, and we often forget that. And it kind of leads me to think about like all the things that came and went out of that port and how that port connected New York City to the whole world. And we live a very, very different kind of life than people did back in other countries than most people even live today. I mean, we'll look up and we'll say, "Oh, what do you want to have tonight? How about some Thai food?" Like, I had Chinese food yesterday or something, as if it was somehow related, and that what you had yesterday has anything to do with what you're going to have today. Um, if you are in a good size Italian city and you wake up in the morning and you're really tired, say you're in Torino, and you wake up in the morning and you don't really feel like Torinese food, guess what you're probably going to have today? Torinese food. Most people in the world don't get to think about, like, well, I ate that 3 days ago and I'm bored with it. In the United States, especially in a place like New York, we had everything. Everything. Every kind of beer from everywhere was here. There were so many IPA breweries in New York City. There was a New York Burtonizing Company that existed just to selling brewing salts to IPA and Pale Ale brewers in New York. You could get whatever you wanted. And I'm talking about like the 1880s. Your people were from Campania and you're tired of Campanian food, walk 5 blocks that way and you'd be in China. Walk 12 blocks that way and you'd be in Sweden. There would be a different language and people would have completely different food. We were never locked into anything. In Brooklyn, we had 48 breweries, and those 48 breweries were brewing 10% of all the beer in the United States. We had the most diverse food culture on the face of the earth and the most diverse beer culture on the face of the earth. And we had everything because we had everybody. And that was our strength. I think it continues to be our strength. But we went through a weird period. Now I look around, this room, and I can see that most of you did not live through the weird period, uh, um, which is cool. And it's the weird period and our recovery from it, that we're going to talk about today, because it's really what I do on a day-to-day basis. Is I feel like I am helping us recover from the strangeness of the middle of the 20th century. Um, so we had, and this kind of pertains in a way to your business, we had a huge difference between what 1920 looked like, which is when Prohibition came in, and what 1933 looked like, which is when Prohibition ended. Prohibition is a fascinating subject if you've never really studied it. It's a lot more interesting than it sounds. It was not really an anti alcohol movement, but more of an anti German, anti Catholic movement, which was kind of tied together with the women's suffrage movement. Had relatively little to do with alcohol itself. But I digress. The important thing is that 13 years later, from 1920 to 1933, you emerged into a completely different world. Oh, sure, beer came back, but the world was different. And in a way, it's almost as different as it was between, say, 1993 and 10 years later for most of us when there were, smartphones starting to pop up everywhere, et cetera, shortly after that. And, you had search engines, yourselves foremost among them. We couldn't imagine that world, and we don't remember the old one almost anymore. But by 1933, you had a true mass market possible. You had actual modern media, a radio network that could reach out to everybody all at once. And this was new. Beer used to be local. It was a thing like all other food, it was local. It got trucked a little ways, but there wasn't really a network of highways. So you could only get food so far. I think even by the 1970s, Pabst was still the number one beer in the United States. And it probably had, 20, 30% of the market. It wasn't possible to grab everything at once. But finally, they figured out like, wait a minute, we have the ability, we now have roads, and we have trucks, and we have a railroad system, and we've got this, and we have that, and we have mass communications, which makes possible that mass market. And what is to be most profitable is to sell only one thing in each category, control the category, and get all the money. And that is the end of the kind of more radical, straightforward idea of capitalism. Your job is to get all the money. And the people in the food industry started to think about it that way. And the really horrible thing about it is that we like to act like we fought it all the way, but we didn't. We asked for it because it was science, and science was going to solve everything. And science is kind of like the Force in Star Wars. It has this bright side, it has this dark side, and at certain times, people only look at one side and they're not really seeing the other kind of creeping up, behind them. So the same forces that wanted American sugar to be blindingly white and that wanted all of our bread and our food to be blindingly white, and then to have these ideas of purity running very hard, everything from eugenics on down to food. We can make things pure. We can solve all problems. And the problem when it came to food was life. Things that are alive are a problem. Everything is trying to eat sugar. It's trying to get protein, which means that it's trying to get into your food and spoil it. A loaf of bread was a problem. That had two ends on it. You had to slice the thing, then try to make a bunch of sandwiches for the kids, get the kids out the door. Most people were poor, but you could solve that problem by making stuff that would never, ever spoil. In 1999, and I'm sure there are people, myself possibly included, who can do entire parts of this movie verbatim. Uh, but one of my favorite movies, the original, The Matrix, which obviously posits a world where computers have essentially pulled down a scrim over the real world and replaced the real world with a computer generated vision. But here's the thing, you know, I grew up in the Matrix. I grew up in the Matrix, and the Matrix was the American supermarket. When you walked in, there were all these things in the supermarket that were labeled as food, but they weren't food. Almost none of them were actually food. Bread, there were two kinds of bread. There was white bread, and there was white bread with food coloring, which they called wheat bread. And this bread stayed fresh in a bag for 2 weeks. That was the expiration date. Now, who here has ever made a loaf of bread at home? Okay, how long does your average loaf of bread stay fresh? 1 day, 2 days? Okay, a loaf of bread does not stay fresh in a bag for 2 weeks. The thing in the bag was not bread. It didn't look like bread. It didn't smell like bread. It didn't taste like bread. It was not made from what bread is made from, and it was not made how bread is made. It had no actual bread attributes. And how can we actually, and every person, if you ask them what is bread made of, they could tell you. There were 4 or 5 ingredients, each of which could be pronounced by a 5-year-old child. But this bread had 40 ingredients printed in a big blue panel, and all of them were the unpronounceable names of chemicals. The question is, why are you not scared? You give this to your children. You have no idea what it is, right? It doesn't even taste good. It doesn't even taste good. Even worse than that, it was never supposed to taste good. It wasn't its job to taste good. Its job was to keep your meat from falling onto the floor and to hold on to mayonnaise and for you to pay for it. That's its job. I always wondered, why did they call it a crust when it wasn't crusty? It had never even been in an oven. It was sprayed on food coloring. Every single thing about it was fake. This is the Matrix, and this is the world of American food in the 1970s, 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. I saw my first broccoli plant, like stalk of broccoli, that you could go out anywhere in New York City now and buy at 4 o'clock in the morning to your heart's content. I saw my first broccoli plant when I was in my 20s. Broccoli came chopped up, frozen in a box. It was a brick. And that was the only way you could get it. Not that you wanted it, because your mom was going to cook it the way everybody else was going to cook it. Follow the instructions. Put in a little bit of water, cook approximately 30 minutes until gray. And that was the way that we ate broccoli. I hated broccoli. I hated every vegetable except for iceberg lettuce. That was the one you could get fresh. Everything, there were only 2 kinds of broccoli. There were 2 separate names, but that was it. And that was food. Even the Thanksgiving turkey that we all got familiar with, let's face it, nobody even likes the turkey. Nobody even likes the turkey. They're like, I don't like turkey, it's dry. It's like, real turkeys aren't dry. An actual turkey is a delicious bird, but most Americans have never even had one. So the Matrix is still here. I want you to think about this. The stuff that you probably, a good many of you, maybe some of you are still thinking about doing it this weekend. You're going to put it on your hamburger. It melts so beautifully. So I want to think about, what is this? And if your answer is cheese, I want you to think again. First of all, the package doesn't even say cheese on it. It mentions the word cheese. American pasteurized processed cheese food product. Sounds delicious, huh? Got a whole bunch of ingredients. What this is an edible plastic. And that is not a joke. I know people who are working on this for the military, so you can carry this stuff around in your pocket forever, take it out in the desert, and eat it. Now, if your definition of food is something which does have calories and does not kill you immediately, well, all kinds of things are food. This is awesome. I can come down there and eat your papers and whatever else, and I'll get some sustenance, and I'm not going to die, not right now. It's all food, right? What is this? Well, You probably have a nostalgia, some of you, about it. You're thinking, there are a few of you actually thinking about grilled cheese sandwiches when you see it. You are really well conditioned. This isn't cheese. This was never cheese. Went to my first cheese shop, my first actual cheese shop in 1983 in Paris, and I literally walked in and I said, "What's that smell?" It is the fromage, monsieur. I'm like, no, 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 no. I've had all four cheeses and none of them smell like that. And these are covered in mold. No, they've solved the entire problem. Life has gone away. It's undead. It was never alive, and it's never going to be alive. I could walk around with this for a month in my pocket, take it out and eat it right now, and each one of you knows that's true. You know it's true. You know nothing will ever happen to this. And yet, somehow, to you, this still looks like food. That's the matrix. Do you know why it's yellow? The reason why it's yellow is that hundreds of years ago, everybody knew that as cheeses got older, they gained more flavor. They also became yellow over time, as many things do. They oxidized, they were melanoidin reaction products, and your cheese became yellow. So yellowness became a symbol, and it was a symbol of age and therefore quality. Now, people started later to add annatto food coloring into cheeses to give them that color so that you would associate their cheese with quality even if that quality wasn't there. Then you denature the product further into something which isn't even cheese anymore and put the coloring in there. And then you look at this now today, identify this as cheese, identify yellow as the color that cheese should be, based on something hundreds of years ago, which you no longer even remember and never even knew. That's the matrix. And that's the way that it worked. And it worked on everything. Nobody here probably is old enough to remember Seal Test ice cream. I probably shouldn't mention, you should beep that out, the actual name. But that's the one that they were all the same. It was a box of air. This thing weighed absolutely nothing, a cardboard box of air. So I remember going down south one time. I think I was in Virginia. I was on a road trip, and we pulled up to a diner, and a stack of pancakes sounded great. There are literally cows out there in the field. We're from New York City. This is awesome. There are cows outside, and the lady says to us, "Well, I have the syrup," and it's like, okay. I knew it wasn't really going to be maple syrup. This was like, 1985 or something. But then she put these pats of goo on the table, and it was like the old school thing. It had like a little square of wax paper, and there was like splat. And when we said, "Well, can we have some butter?" And they're like, "Well, this is butter." I'm like, "No, actually, this is margarine. We'd like to have some butter." And her previously sweet nature went away suddenly, and she said rather bitterly, "Well, this is the only butter we have." And it turned out that no matter where you went in the United States, the closer you were to actual cows, the further you would be from butter, and vice versa. And that's still true today. I love the idea of kind of facsimile and reality in butter, because margarine actually started off as fake butter for poor people. And then during during the 80s, it actually turned from being fake butter to real margarine, because they said that it was actually better for you than butter, and they actually started to promote the fact that it didn't have the properties of butter. It supposedly didn't have the same fats, et cetera, et cetera. Butter was terrible for you, and margarine was good. Then they found out that this wasn't actually true, and the whole thing reversed, and margarine, which had been fake butter, then became real margarine, became fake butter again. All these things depend on what it is you're trying to get and what it is that you're thinking about it. When I first lived in London, well, before I lived in London, I lived in Boston, and I went to Boston University. We drank beer basically every day. But the thing was, we didn't like it. We didn't like it. There wasn't anything to like. It was yellow, it was fizzy, and I will tell you the truth. We drank the mass market brands like Budweiser when we had money. We never had any money, but if we had a little bit of money, we got that stuff, because at least it tasted like water. You know, the other stuff, which I will not mention by name, tasted much, much worse than water. They were horrible, absolutely horrible. The thing is that those mass market brands won out for a reason. Uh, the mass market bread won for a reason. You've heard the term the best thing since sliced bread, but it never occurred to you probably to think about, well, what's so great about sliced bread? How could something be the best thing since sliced bread? Sliced bread was considered awesome. Stay fresh in a bag for 2 weeks, never throw out a slice, no food waste. That's great if it's food. So, beer, we thought we knew what it was. It was yellow, it was fizzy, and it tasted okay or it didn't. But we drank everything. We were college students. 18 was the drinking age back then, and we drank like fish. And Tuesdays, kamikaze night at Molly's. Okay, whatever. Try to find the bartender who's really going to hook you up. And that was about it. And then I got to London. And my first day, I'm like, oh, this is a British beer I've heard so much about. And it's brown. It's like, I wonder why it looks like that. And then I taste it, it's not even cold. And then it's barely fizzy. And I'm drinking it, and it's like, this tastes like hay and flowers and fruit and sea air. And I'm drinking it, and I'm like, I get to the bottom, I'm like, I'm not sure I liked that. I better have another one to find out. And I became completely fascinated with this stuff. And I traveled all over Europe, from then Czechoslovakia to Belgium, etc. And everywhere you went, people had different beer. And it started to occur to me as I went to the cheese shops and I went to the beer places, etc. We've been lied to. That wasn't cheese. That wasn't bread. That wasn't a croissant. This is a croissant. That beer wasn't beer. And I was pissed. I was pissed. I got back and I went to the bar and they had the same four beers they'd had when I left in 1983. Came back in 1984, pretty appropriately, and they were like, Heineken. I was like, oh no, I can't do this anymore. I took the red pill. Yeah, I'd already left the matrix. I was not going back into the matrix. So I determined for myself that the only way to have any beer was to make it myself. And my best friend Larry, one year he gave me a home brewing kit for Christmas. It's like, man, I'm so tired of hearing you talk about, I hear you talk about how much you can't get a good beer. Here, make it yourself. So I did. And it was kind of magic, and it's still kind of magic, to take this really inert looking material. I mean, let's face it, I love malt, but it doesn't look like grapes. I mean, now I love wine. I think wine is a quite limited beverage. I mean, that one ingredient they've got, it's a nice ingredient, that one ingredient. They can do a lot with it. They can't do nearly what I can do with malt or whatever else. Like every time I do a competition versus a sommelier, wine versus beer with cheese, there are two types of opponents: the ones who know they're going to lose and the ones who don't know they're going to lose. I like the second type better, you know, because they're more combative about it and they just go down spinning in flames. You can't beat me. You can't beat me. I can make something that tastes like anything. Like anything. I have a whole drawer full of, I can spice things, I can smoke them, I can caramelize them. I have a whole range of yeasts and things to work with, and you have this one grape. Nice grape. but there's no way you're going to win this competition. So I have a good time smoking these guys. But people don't think of beer that way. They think of beer as a commodity. That's only now starting to change. People look at it because they're thinking of the Matrix version of beer as beer. What's funny about the way the market works, though, perception wise, is that the actual truth of the American wine market is a bag and box or a jug with a finger loop. That is 90% of the American market. 90%. The stuff that you're thinking about when I say wine, the nice label and a cork and whatever else, less than 10%. Less than 10%. When we think about scotch, we tend to think about single malt. That's not the scotch market. The scotch market is blended scotch. The stuff that you probably, by and large, don't drink, that's the actual market. The difference is that when people think about beer, they think of the 90% at the bottom, and when they think of wine, they think of the 90%, the 10% at the top. That's marketing. Boy, the French are so good. I mean, I have to love that about them. Ronald Reagan was not my favorite guy. I will tell you right now. I did, speaking of our political season, I did wear a black armband, for 2 weeks when he got elected in 1980. I was not into him then, and I'm not into now. But I'll tell you one thing that he did that turned out interestingly. He deregulated the airlines. And one thing that this resulted in was cheaper airfares. And Americans started to travel. And they went overseas and they said, now, wait a minute. Look at all this food. Look at these markets. Like, this is unbelievable. Where's ours? And this is really what jump-started craft brewing, in the United States, was Americans going overseas, finding out that beer was not what they thought it had been, leaving the matrix food and beer-wise, coming back and starting not only the craft brewing movement, but all of the interest that we see flowering in food, in cheese, in chocolate, in all sorts of things. These are not actually separate phenomena. We look at them as being separate because we, as ourselves, think of ourselves as brewers or we're beer fans. We may or may not be chocolate people or coffee people or whatever else. It's all one thing. And what's fascinating is that you would have thought in 2008, when the economy collapsed, that what you would have had was a decline of this fancy stuff. Because after all, millions and millions of people are losing their jobs. People are insecure in their incomes. This stuff is more expensive, and you would expect it to decline. What happened, interestingly, is exactly the opposite. People said, I'm not going on vacation this year. I'm not getting that new car. I can't afford that new suit, but I'm sure as hell not giving that up. I am going to keep that. I'm going to stay in the actual world. And I'll leave you with a thought here. Americans are odd people. We are suspicious of pleasure. Now, when I said the word pleasure, some of you had a little jolt of, that sounds dirty. The word pleasure actually sounds dirty to Americans. You know who it doesn't sound dirty to? Italians. And that's why we go there. Because when an Italian says pleasure, that automatically just sets off nothing but happy thoughts in their head. And you know what word you can't explain to an Italian? Try explaining to an Italian what a foodie is. I hate that word so much. I can't even tell you how much I hate that word. I'm not even foodie. I'm not really foodie. It's like, what is it's like, oh, like a foodie is a person for whom food is one of the principal pleasures in their entire life. And the Italian would just look at you and say, as opposed to who? Like, what other person would there be? It's like, sex, really like it. It's like, as far as they're concerned, food is, yes, it is sustenance, but you're supposed to be having a good time. Can you imagine listening to music all the time that you didn't like? Just like go home and it's like, it's music. Now, there are people like that. They can't hang out at my house. I mean, you cannot be anywhere around me and not care at least a little bit about what you're eating, not your drinking, because, liking some things and not liking other things, we call it taste, and you have to have some. What we're in right now is simply a recovery. And some people remember the Matrix and some people don't. Those of us who lived through it and who grew up in it, many of us are determined to make sure that we never go back that way again. And fortunately, what we're seeing is that we are winning. People are unwilling to go back there and drink that stuff. Oh yeah, maybe if they want to be ironic, it's like it's the trucker hat of of beer when you want to be funny. But when it comes right down to it, people really just aren't interested in bad things anymore. And I think that the big breweries thought that there was going to be this is a pendulum. It's a fad. It's going to swing back the other direction. It's like no, actually, there is no fad and there is no pendulum. This is a return to normality. This is the way things were supposed to be. We had 4,000 breweries with every kind of beer already. And if you look at the history of American food, what you see is everything in the whole world, all the way out here. And then post war, you have a very thin period where everything is squeezed. And this is the choke point. This is the matrix. This is big business trying to get all the money. And now that you can't find everybody anymore, you don't know where they are, you don't know how to market to them, they are not going to be sitting in front of the same three channels, on Friday night at 8 o'clock. Now you can't reach everybody, everything fractures again. Taste also fractures again, and people go back to having actual taste, not taste controlled from a central point. And that's what craft beer actually is. That's what I do every day. And people ask on a day-to-day basis, "Oh, what is a craft brewery? Is it a small brewery? Is it a brewery run by somebody who's under 26, or is it a brewery that Well, I'm going to say no. Um, I'll give you my version of what a craft brewery is. A craft brewery is a brewery really controlled by one individual vision. There is a person, not a committee, not a department, a person whose taste is expressed through what's going on, in front of you in that glass. That's a craft brewery. I don't care how big it is. If that person is saying this is the way forward, and this is what we do, and this is who we are, then yeah, that can be a craft brewery, and it can be 20 times our size as far as I'm concerned, as long as they're doing the right thing and they're bringing reality to people in the form of a glass. And what I tell younger brewers is they want, they want advice. And what I tell them is brew the truth. Brew the truth. Whatever is your personal truth, whatever makes you get up in the morning and say, I want to go do that job, that's your God. You go serve that God every day. And when you're no longer serving him, pack your bags, go home. And we don't want to see you anymore. We're not interested in fear. We're only interested in making things that taste good for hopefully nice people. And I'll tell you what, it's a lot of fun. It's pretty good. I hope you guys will sometime come and visit us. There are many ways to visit Brooklyn Brewery. Some will impart information to your mind. Other ways of visiting us will remove information from your mind. If you come on Friday night, you will leave knowing less than you did when you came. We will teach you absolutely nothing. However, there are ways of coming during the week where you can come see us. You can check it out, brooklynbrewery.com. You can just come see us, and you can come in for small tours. They are the big tours of the weekend. Lots of fun things to drink, and I hope that you'll come check us out. Of course, in a certain way, I see you guys every day, so probably more times a day than I want to imagine. We here, but I hope you will come see us. We here. I thought it would be churlish to come and bring not one drop of beer with me. So I did bring one drop of beer with me. So we're gonna have we'll have a little bit of a beer here afterwards. It is a beer. I did go to film school, so you'll have to forgive. The name of the beer is The Discreet Charm of the Framboisie. He's the one who actually got the joke. Everybody else, who wants to know what this is a reference to, is going to have to Google it. And I think that you probably think that's pretty okay. Thanks very much.
And we have time for a few questions if any of you have questions for him.
Sure.
Hi, Garrett. Thanks for coming in. I really like your talk. I love your beers.
Thanks.
So a lot of the food you were talking about, like the matrix food, like processed cheese, a lot of that comes from the military because they're like one of the biggest investors in, R&D into food. So you mentioned like Reagan deregulating the airlines and like Americans going abroad, and that was a huge cultural shift to get people to kind of wake up. So do you think we're still just like on the downslope from that discovery, or do you see any cultural shifts like more recently that might take people away from the matrix? Because like the military is still like really invested into R&D into food preservation and things like that, like the energy bar, and like they're really into like discovering like shelf stable pizzas now. And like when people in America like really value convenience, like still a lot over taste, like do you see any other like indicators in culture that might like swing us out of that convenience heavy mindset and more into like actual food?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think that, and it is sometimes ironic that I was one of the founders of the slow food movement. Here in the United States. Slow Food USA. About 16 years ago. It's a worldwide eco-gastronomical organization, so it looks to preserve worldwide food culture and the biological diversity necessary to make real food. And we always joked that the time that we were most likely to end up eating fast food was when we were traveling for slow food. Like you'd be like running through an airport, whatever else. And I wrote my last book took 4.5 years, and I'm not going to sit there and tell you there were not times that I wish to God that in Brooklyn we had drive-ins, because I'm like I have 12 minutes. I have 3 minutes to get the food, and I have 6 minutes to eat the food, and I have like 2 minutes to clean up what's left over from the food. I have no time. Somebody give me some food, give me some food, give me some food. I would have eaten anything, at the time. Fortunately, I discovered peanuts. and at the end of that whole process, I had lost 20 pounds. Everybody looked at me and said, "You look great," and I said, "I'm dying." but peanuts are. I still love peanuts. But I think that yeah, you're always going to have a need for things that are convenient. However, actual cheese and peanuts and things like that are not actually inconvenient. If you have them, they are among the most convenient things you can have. I can literally put some peanuts in a bag or a trail mix or whatever else. It can be made of 100% real stuff, and it even tastes good, and it's great protein and everything else going to keep you going for many hours. It's just a matter of what you're willing to pay, and I think that a lot of it really comes down to the fact that in our culture, the people who are most likely to know how to take $10 worth of material and turn them into a really great meal for four people. I can do that. I can do that and leave several dollars over. And there'll be sauces and all kinds of stuff. The people who know how to do that are rich people. It used to be everybody. Everybody knew how to cook. And it might have been sexist, but they taught home ec to girls, but at least somebody in the household knew how to cook. And this is critically important. And I think what it's going to require, really, from us is things like the edible schoolyard, where we are bringing home to children every day what it means to grow food, what it means to consume food, and what it means to cook food and share food with people. Like if you can cook, I mean, the world's your oyster. It's when you can't. The people who most need that knowledge are the people least likely to have it. I mean, all the great foods of the world are based on poverty. Boil the bones until you get every bit of, you know, stocks and everything else are all based on poverty. So I think that it's one thing I really admire about Michelle Obama is that she, that's one of the main things that she put out there was getting kids, to pay attention, to that, and hopefully we can turn our education system that way. Looking at beer culturally, what's fascinating is that we are now exporting beer culture. It used to be we only took it in. Now, no matter where you go in the world, everybody brews American style stuff. And they're not talking about the mass market beers, they're talking particularly about IPA, but even things like sour beers, which originally came to us in certain forms from Belgium, etc. And now we're giving them back in completely different forms.
Hey there. Thanks for coming, and cheers for the Buñuel reference. My question is, you talked a lot about deregulation,
Yep.
or at least you mentioned it, and the narrative that I'm used to is really Fritz Maytag gives way to Ken Grossman, gives way to this explosion. So I'm curious, do you think that the deregulation piece and Americans traveling was more important, or that it was kind of a perfect storm where you have, again, Fritz Maytag, Ken Grossman, and then this appetite growing in the American public for that type of stuff?
Well, I think that one of you like is push, and the other is pull. So the push is I make the beer and I try to sell you the beer. The pull is you want to buy the beer, and the wanting to buy the beer was really created partly by people tasting what we had, but it was almost like we were a fish and there was no ocean. There was nothing to swim in. We had to actually start distributing our own beer in New York City. Sierra Nevada came to us and said, "We can't sell our beer either. Nobody wants it. Would you put our beer on your trucks?" It's like, "Well, you're our competitor." It's like, "Yeah, I know, but none of us can get to market." And then Chimay came, and Polaner came, and everybody came. By the time we were done and we sold that business off, we had 200 plus brands because nobody wanted these beers. There were like 8 guys who wanted them. What deregulation did is that flying to places became something for the jet set. And we all have heard the term, but we forget that it was a real thing. People who could get on a plane were rich people. Um, by a point in the mid 80s, I was flying to Boston because I didn't have money for the bus. I mean, it got weird there for a while. You won't remember Freddie Laker's airline, but I'm glad still to be here because Lord knows that was a budget airline, I'll tell you. But it got off the ground and it went back down again and it landed. So I guess everything was okay. But yeah, things got. I mean, your average American college student now is if you hear they've been to Europe once or twice, it doesn't sound as weird as it would have. If you said that in like 1980, people would have imagined you were insanely wealthy. So yeah, I think that it's true that Americans don't are famous for not having passports. We are not a traveling people. We have a very big country, so there is some excuse. But the fact that we started to actually travel, all that happened in California, the new food movement, people like Alice Waters, it's all down to them traveling, and that comes down to Ken Grossman and Fritz Maytag too. They went to England, they came back on fire to get some for themselves.
Cool. So it seems like the United States. Thanks for coming, by the way.
No, not at all. It's great to be here.
It seems like this is currently this is a sort of renaissance for beer and maybe even the organic movement, whatever you want to call it. And we're exporting that, as you said. In fact, you can find Brooklyn Brewery all the way in China. I've been able to find it there, although you can't find it in California. And I want to know why. That's actually my question.
The reason is, and you may not like this reason. I don't want to get myself in too much trouble. We have really followed a strategy of going to where we found really cool things and like-minded, nice people, and we go there. Now, that does not mean that we're not cool things and nice, like-minded, nice people. But if you're in New York, you can get on a plane, and in 6 hours, you can be in California, or you can be in Paris. And if you have to choose one, I decided to get on the plane to Paris. Now, California is beautiful. I have so many friends out there. They make a lot of great beer. We will get ourselves out there eventually. But really, it came down to we're like, well, we feel like going that way. It's an overnight flight. You can get up, you sleep on the plane, you get up in the morning, there's cool stuff when you get there. It's not America, and we liked it. So we started traveling immediately after establishing the brewery.
Yeah.
1989, we were in Tokyo. We were selling beer in Tokyo. And it was always, you see other American beers internationally now, but actually the number 2 market for a Brooklyn brewery outside of the New York City area itself is Sweden.
Interesting.
So we have a second sister brewery, Nya Bryggeriet in Stockholm, And then we're just finishing the redevelopment, opening a couple of weeks of Acidals in Trondheim, Norway. And there will certainly be other things coming. But our international associations have always been really, really strong. The owners of the brewery are half Italian. They speak fluent Italian. We've brewed beer in Italy with partners to do projects when we were actually the first brewery in the world to do collaborations. So when we started doing them, that was the start of the collaboration culture. And for a long time, we were the only ones really going out there doing them, us and whoever we chose to do a collaboration with. And when I went back to Germany and did the first collaboration in Germany, people were kind of like, wow, this is really weird. Americans are going to come here and brew a beer, and then the Germans are going to come over there. But now this has become like 10 years later, 15 years later, it's like totally normal.
Yeah, it's almost, when I talk to friends that are from Europe, it's almost like they appreciate the American beers more than the beers in their own
Well,
country.
that's true, and actually, I think that's a shame. I think that's a shame. I think that we get a little bit too big for our britches sometimes because everybody's swelled with pride that like the American thing is what everybody wants. Frankly, when I go overseas, the first thing people will say to me is like, "You want to taste our IPA?" Now, I'm going to be polite and I'm going to taste it. The answer is no. No, I don't want to taste your IPA. We have 10,000 IPAs, actually a lot more than that, in the United States. And we, at least a modern version of this, we invented it. It's like taking a Japanese person out for sushi in New York. It's like, come on, dude, really? I mean, can't you find him some barbecue or something? And so I'm most interested. Like, I go to Brazil. I want to see what are you doing that I can't do? You got some stuff. You know some things. Your grandmother knew some things. Do you know how many kinds of sugar these guys have? And I went down there and I actually carried out one of those ideas. They said, let's do a beer together. I'm like, fine, I got an idea. I said, what is it? Like, I love cachaça. I said, and I can't get sugarcane, not fresh sugarcane. You got to use it within 24 hours. We went down, cut down 700 kilos of sugarcane and crushed it straight into the kettle to make a beer called Saison de Caipira that has actual sugarcane character. And 20% of the sugars in the beer were straight off the plant like that day. And the reason for me it was so cool is not just the flavor of the beer. Like, I can't do that here. Like, not possible. That has a flavor of place, and I love that. I hope people will continue to explore that wherever they are and have a little pride in like what's going on locally.
I'll just say anecdotally, I just got back from Texas, a family reunion, where I was able to find Brooklyn beer. I bought some. They loved it.
Well, I'm glad to hear it because Texas pride is fierce. So
They all want to drink Shiner.
yeah, well, as I said, Texas pride is fierce. It overcomes almost anything. Anybody else? See, they're thinking, we would like to drink the beer now. All right, have at it. The beer is called the Discreet Charm of the Framboisie. It is a sour beer. It is not tremendously sour. If you've had sour beers and you think that they are awful, I still urge you to try it. Think more, sparkling rosé. I'm not a person. There are great complexities there. The beer spent several months on fresh raspberries, 15 pounds per barrel. They were previously used bourbon barrels. And then re-fermented in the bottle. So the beer was bottled completely flat and gains all of its carbonation from the secondary fermentation in the bottle with champagne yeast and Brettanomyces, which is a wild yeast strain, which is just starting to show itself a little bit of an earthy complexity in the background. But if you want to turn all that off and just say, hey, this is happy juice, that's totally fine by me because that's kind of what it is. So I hope you like it. It's about 7%. Won't completely put a spin on you, but hopefully brings a little bit of brightness to your day.